It's a couple weeks old now because I planned to bring this up last week, or what was it, Wednesday or whatever. But whatever.
Yeah, weeks ago.
Yeah, I know, weeks ago.
Time has no meaning anymore.
But
Yes.
there was an article that came out about the Phantom Menace.
Ooh.
That when the script was originally written, there was an interview given about a guy who worked on the films.
Oh, you sent this to us.
Yeah, I did, but I don't know if you watched the video. But there was originally planned that when you start the Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan Kenobi was supposed to be Liam Neeson's character. He was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you were going to watch it thinking, this is the Obi-Wan we see. And then, and like that, and then he would die just like he does in that movie. And at that point, Qui-Gon Jinn would be Ewan McGregor's character, and George Lucas had the plan for Qui-Gon or Ewan McGregor to then take on the name Obi-Wan Kenobi and then go on to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi that we know.
Kind of like passing the name down.
Yeah.
Not hereditarily, but master to apprentice. The name transfers.
Yes, and like, I love you, my master. So I'm going to take on your name and carry your honor. And it's so interesting thinking about it because like that's actually such a cool idea. And it's like I'm so torn. Where like half of me is like, oh man, I'm so sad they cut that. And then the other half of me is like, it's like the exact kind of prequel gotcha nonsense that I'm so glad he did cut it out. Because it is like you thought this was Qui-Gon, but or no, you thought this was Obi-Wan. It's not Obi-Wan. He's dead. Yeah. And he took the name. It's like
it does. It feels like something that would fit more into books.
Yes,
than the movie.
I agree.
Because there's a little bit more space to kind of delve into that sort of lore. But I do honestly, it feels very knight.
Yes,
and samurai.
Yeah,
it does.
Kind of
that is a lot of what I like about it.
Well, the thing I like about it, now that I'm just having this thought, is that when you turn to the dark side, you're given a name that is given by your master. So maybe the light side version of it is you just take on the master's mantle. I would have kind of liked the gotcha at the end, like, whoa, he's dead. I mean, I was also 9 when it came out, so
I know when I was 10, it would have been like,
Obi-Wan's dead.
Well, what's interesting though is like it doesn't actually change anything because the character is still the same. Like Ewan McGregor is still the young version of Ben Kenobi.
For one movie, you would be like, this is your
right.
Your
maybe
feelings
you're a
of where
confused.
they're headed are swapped.
Sure.
Which actually was the other one was like it's kind of Wolfian.
Yes.
It's actually because it's this whole like wait, especially if it had gone. It would be really Wolfian if it had gone like multiple movies.
Yeah.
Or it was like
at the end of episode 3 or something.
I did watch what you sent, and they were trying to tie what Alec Guinness?
Yep, Alec Guinness.
What he said when he was like, Obi-Wan, I haven't gone by that name for quite some time. He was trying to make that line kind of make
right,
be like, aha.
Like, that wasn't my born.
I've had this plan since A New Hope.
It was a name I took on.
That is interesting. The other thing I like about it actually is it kind of implies that there's just like there's the rule of 2 with the Sith. Mm-hmm. It kind of implies that there's something similar for the Jedi where there's only X number of Jedi. And that you would have to do something pretty spectacular to be able to have your own like new name.
Right.
Otherwise,
like a knight of, like you were saying, a knight of the flowers.
Otherwise, it's a name that's passed down for generations, which is very cool also. So I think it was probably best that it was cut.
I think so.
I don't think that it probably would have. I have a lot of love for the prequel movies. I enjoyed. Obviously, we were the exact right age when they came out.
Yeah.
And
lucky us.
Having watched them fairly recently, they hold up a lot better than people talk about.
Yeah.
Especially given
think
some of the trash that's come out.
Truly. But I don't think that they were maybe written well enough to handle that sort of a thing.
That's what I was going to say, too. They
correctly.
Would have been, especially them being movies for younger kids, then like dialogue later is like Obi-Wan. It's like, well, wait, which Obi-Wan?
Right. Yeah. It's just that's why I mean it feels like something that like would translate better maybe in a book where you've got a lot more space.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's cool.
It's a really cool. It's an interesting idea. Little behind the scenes thing.
It's an interesting idea.
So.
It's an interesting idea.
Little behind the scenes thing. Hello, Michael Van, and welcome to the Under Towers podcast. My name is Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
We have a fantastic...
Or I'm Obi-Wan.
We have a fantastic episode for you tonight. We are going to be continuing our Arthur series with A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by one Mr. Mark Twain.
This is a true story, too.
Yeah, it is. It is, absolutely.
It
is.
It's
the dude's diary. So
it was
must be
given
true.
to Twain. He did not write it.
Yeah, it says so in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I think we all have a little bit of news. Mine, I'll keep it very brief because there's not a whole heck of a lot of information out about it yet. But there has been ordered and announced a new Dragon Quest manga.
Oh,
Manga.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't a game coming out too?
Yes, the game comes out in like a week.
Yeah,
like
pretty
next
soon.
week. Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D. But there is a new manga. So there's the Quest of Dai manga.
Yes.
Which I have all of it that is available in English. I think there's one more book that still has yet to be translated. And I think
I've
there might
watched
be
it all.
one other one.
I watched the anime.
But this is the first new manga for Dragon Quest in that world in a while.
There is another anime, an older anime, and there may be a manga for that too, so you may be
Yeah.
right, but yeah.
And I
Do you know
think
what
there's more
story it
stuff in
follows?
Japan that hasn't been
That
translated
makes
yet.
sense.
I don't know. There might be some stuff out there now, but the thing that I saw was pretty much just hey, there's a new one coming.
That's cool.
So
Rad.
yeah, super stoked for that. So that's my news. New Dragon Quest manga.
Well,
Fun.
mine is also anime related. I don't know if you guys saw this, but anime's gone Catholic.
Finally. Finally.
The Vatican announced their
little,
little anime,
waifu.
their little waifu Luce.
Little waifu of Christ.
I think it's Luce. And we'll at least put these up on the Twitter and the Instagram.
It looks very
We'll
cute.
put it up on
It
the screen,
actually
too.
is
Yeah.
It's
very,
very
cute,
cute,
but
yeah.
I'll just give it. It's a little
That's why. Is
blue-haired lady
not?
in a yellow
You're
rain
true.
jacket. She's got a cross and some beads. She's got muddy blue boots on, like a little, I guess, like a shepherd's rod.
Yeah.
And then she's got seashells in her eyes. That's the one I don't. That's the one that's
Seashells in her
most
eyes.
like.
It must be like an
Fascinating.
I don't
icon
know.
or something.
Yeah, and then just
Yep.
it kills me.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's,
what's going on.
Waifu of Christ.
I know. And what's funny
amazing.
is people were like mad about it for like a few days, and then it's been like everybody's like, this is hilarious, and like
Yeah.
it's actually been pretty positive. But like
That's
I
kind
don't
of
know.
great. It's like the best thing the
Yeah.
church has done in a while.
Yeah.
I'm just like, we need.
Hey, yeah.
Most well received, anyways.
I just want to see some other like. I want to see the Mormon waifu and like a Islamic waifu as well.
Oh, we
like
gotta go.
just
we need to
other
keep going.
denominations of Christianity.
That
Let's
too.
have the
Yes, Southern Baptist.
Southern Baptist waifu.
Charismatic. We need
Yes.
we need the Seventh Day
Get
Adventist.
on
Let's,
this.
our
need-
Assemblies
and then
of
you
God
can-
waifu.
And then you
Oh,
can
that'll
collect
be-
them like the horrible little boxed guys, with the, whatever those things are called.
Surely they'll
I
make
can't even
some
remember what they're
bobbleheads.
called.
Oh my God, that was
But,
great. Yes,
yeah.
thank you for bringing that up. That's
Yeah,
an important part
that's
of
news.
That
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
there's some other stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, I know.
That has kind of made that get swept under the rug. So
Absolutely.
Mhm, yeah.
And then my other piece of news was Mike Duncan, who does the Revolutions podcast. He also did a History of Rome podcast as well. Just started a science fiction series under his Revolutions thing. So he's a best-selling historian. And the Revolutions podcast has gone over, I think, starting with the English Revolution, has done most of the major revolutions, at least in Western European and American history.
interesting.
failed and successful
Yeah, so
ones.
French Revolution, American Revolution, and others as well. And he does a really good job communicating those as from a historical standpoint. But he's been on a 2-year hiatus, I think, because he got divorced mostly. But he is back, and again, where it's like, why are we talking about a history podcast? His new series is The Martian Revolution. So he,
Interesting.
as a historian, has written as a historian doing his style, telling the history of the Martian Revolution, I think. And he's even written in it. One of the things that's interesting is I think he's telling it from like 2400 or 2500, where the revolution happened in 2200 something. And then he's giving, though, from there, like the whole ramp up to it. There's a lot of little, like, he's actually doing a really good job of it, where there's like lots of little side mentions to things. There are 3 episodes out so far. I've enjoyed them.
So that was my question. Is this formatted? Is it formatted like a story, like a normal fiction kind of story, or is it like or is he telling it like a podcast?
He's telling it like he's doing his history podcast about the Martian Revolution.
That's fun.
It's actually pretty cool.
That's cool.
It's pretty cool. So it's doing sci-fi, but through the but exactly like a podcast doing.
It's like a podcast mockumentary kind of thing.
But it's more serious. Than
Sure.
That.
Yeah.
Sure.
Almost as cute as the Catholic anime.
Yeah. So almost. But he tells them just him. He's got a good wit about him. He does a good job. These have been fun so far. New episodes come out, I believe, on Sundays. 3 out so far. They're usually about 30 minutes each, and I'm gonna follow along with it if it gets interesting. Beyond mentioning it here, we'll maybe recap a little bit more.
Nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Awesome. Sam, you had a piece of news?
Yeah, my news is I guess more mainstream, but that the Dune show is coming out.
Oh yeah, it is
on the 17th.
It is
about the formation of the Bene Gesserit or something.
Yeah, so it's called Prophecy, but it's got a pretty awesome cast.
Bene Gesserit.
That's how you say it. There's a whole soundtrack. It looks awesome, and kind of tying back to Star Wars. I do kind of wish they would do a Star Wars in the same tone that they do Dune.
Interesting.
Maybe like an offshoot of it.
Star Wars
show.
Well, that's kind of what Andor is.
But you know what I mean. But with Jedi's and not so much just like the.
Because I was gonna say, like, as far as the serious aspect goes, you've got Rogue One and Andor.
Yeah, which kind of stand like on their own.
Oh yeah,
really.
Well, it's the best
it's canon
Star
and all.
Wars.
It is. But it's the best, and maybe it's just our age now. Like I want to see that.
It does. Yeah, it's like it's made a little bit more for us that grew up with it and are adults now.
Right. So that was it for news, and then Imogen Heap has a song out, which is wild.
Yeah. Seriously?
She just put one out, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh, how did I miss that?
I barely got it. I just like Spotify notified me. I'm like, it's been like 15 years since she's put anything out.
Well, Frou Frou put out a song a couple years ago,
but still under the moniker, the name.
Just her solo thing.
It's pretty good. I like it
as soon as we're done recording, we'll have to give it a listen.
It's 6 minutes, and like I don't know, you have to love her to like. I get it. I guess
if you don't love her, like what is wrong with you?
It's pretty ravey and kind of scary.
Nice,
but I like it a lot.
This is a tangent, but you brought her up. When I spent a week 10 days in New York City in 2006, and before leaving, the day before I left, I bought Tom York's first solo album, which I'm totally blanking on the name. I can see the cover. Eraser. I bought Eraser, and I bought Hide and Seek.
Okay.
What a fun electronic time.
And I put them both on my iPod.
Mm-hmm.
And
those are the days, man.
Yep. And I those 2 albums are forever linked and forever remind me of New York City, because I just spent that whole time walking around listening to those 2 albums.
Oh, those with that backdrop would be awesome.
It was honestly incredible. Not the smartest thing to just like leave your earbuds in and listen to music when you're walking around in a big city, but it was great.
People have done dumber.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right, so that's our news and a slight tangent. Thank you for that, Sam.
Yeah.
And before we get into discussing A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain, a word.
Oh yeah.
Stretch this out while you pull it up.
From
our sponsors.
Worried your viewpoints won't be vindicated by history? Concerned you won't be on the right side when future generations look back at your beliefs? No. Well, this episode of the Under Towers podcast is brought to you by Chrono Consensus, time traveling opinion surveys, and they're here to help.
Wait, say that again. Time travel opinions?
Chrono Consensus, time traveling opinion surveys, they're here to help.
Surveys.
Through the cutting-edge statistical analysis, forecast modeling, and the remote access time travel that allows them to monitor future social media posts, Chrono Consensus offers retro validation, bringing you
Oh my God, I want this now.
Bringing you tomorrow's opinions today. All viewpoints come color-coded by future political ideologies and social currencies,
They could use this in the 1800s for sure.
mapping out the serpentine path that different ideas will meander down over time.
This would have stopped the Civil War.
It would have. Their entry-level package, the temporal echo chamber, brings you the most standard ideas of tomorrow that
These guys are inspired.
brings you the most standard ideas of tomorrow that closely mirror today's sentiments. The next step up to vindication futures, our broader, more nuanced perspectives, guaranteed to earn validation later with some customizable timelines. For the truly ambitious, Hindsight Prime is their premium service.
Hindsight Prime.
Giving you access to controversial opinions,
Jeff Bezos,
conspiracies.
I know you're listening to this, and this is something.
Giving you access to controversial opinions, conspiracies, and heresies that will, in due time, become mainstream thought, but might get you canceled in the meantime.
But future, it's like
Chrono Consensus. The future already agrees with you. Why wait to be right?
I mean,
As always, code Undertower.
Chronoco.
Code Undertower for 10% off your first package. Whichever package you go for.
package you choose.
What a timely
Yeah.
and prescient advertisement. Thank you.
It came to me
Thank
while I
you
was
to our
meditating.
sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm signing up now. I'm gonna do
Oh my God.
the Prime package.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, that was fantastic. Okay. So, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I grew up reading Twain. I don't know how old I was. I was pretty darn young when the first time I read Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
And then I had a audiobook on cassette unabridged, so it was like 4 tapes. Wore that out. And then obviously read Huck Finn in high school. Somehow never read this. Honestly, glad I didn't until now after having read Lamort Arthur
Yes.
specifically.
Yes.
Because this is very obviously is based in it's based in Lamort Arthur,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah.
I know you did some looking, but just in case anybody is not familiar with Twain, and as always, spoiler alerts for our big book discussions.
Yeah.
But also this book is very
It's so old.
It's
yeah,
very
and
old.
we're gonna dive really deep into this, but yes,
But
if
Mark
you do want
Twain-
to read it first. Yeah.
Mark Twain is a satirist.
Mm-hmm.
He is extremely funny.
One of like the first American satirical writers that's gone mainstream like this.
Yeah,
right?
it's at the very least is kind of the benchmark for that.
Best remembered.
Yeah. An absolutely phenomenal writer.
Yes.
And this book was written in 1889.
Yes, 1889. It is so there's like a lot of I didn't do research on this fact, but it's considered a science fiction book.
Sure.
Because
makes
it has
sense.
a guy traveling back in time, even though there's like no details given to that.
Well, when you look at the technological advances that Hank Morgan
Yes, it's a very
creates
it's a
in
very
the time
practical
that it was,
book. Yes.
that counts as science fiction.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
There were 2 different time travel books. One, a short story by H.G. Wells, but not The Time Machine, and another by another lesser-known author had done a time travel story the year before. Twain had been working on this book for I think 4 or 5 years, so it was kind of all at the same time. So clearly something was in the water. The Time Machine comes out 3-4 years after this. That's like the one that really puts like time travel on the map. And I think a lot of people considered the Time Machine by H.G. Wells really like the beginning of like modern sci-fi. I know Mary Shelley is
Right.
also, but it's also very different.
She's the grandmother of science fiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, H.G. Wells.
It's like that's like when it really.
our modern conception of
Yeah.
science fiction.
Yeah.
But this goes right in there with that kind of daunting. But it's a really, really interesting book. It's very much in communication with Mort d'Arthur. There are just passages of Mort d'Arthur in this book, and a few others. There's like a bit about hermits that's actually some of that's from a text on hermits and a few other things there, which is also really interesting. But yeah, it's a really fascinating, interesting. I don't think I've ever read a book quite like this.
You know what it reminded me a lot of, honestly, was Wizard Knight.
Sure.
And I don't recall seeing it in a lot of conversations about Wizard Knight.
Which is kind of weird.
But I have to imagine it was a massive influence on Wolfe.
Yes.
Not just because of the obvious modern American person dropped into this medieval world, but there's also the first person narrative.
Yes. The tone
kind of
is
epistolary,
so close.
epistolary moments of, in this case, Hank is writing in a journal and Wizard Knight Abel's writing letters to Ben.
Yes.
But yes, tonally, there is, I think, some serious similarities.
Well,
it's not Wizard Knight is not as funny, but there are some humorous elements that are similar and just some fish out of water kind of. I don't know. I think it's an interesting comparison.
There also, I've been looking at other of Twain's works since reading this as we got ready for the show, and thinking about Gene Wolfe as well, because there's also in a book you guys haven't read yet that's of Gene Wolfe's. There's a very this story thing that happens. It's not super drawn out. But it's very clear that this was a story that meant something to him.
Sure.
And one of Gene Wolfe's short story collections is called Innocents Aboard, and one of Twain's bigger novels is called Innocents Abroad.
Oh, okay. Nice.
So there you go.
Clearly just
absolutely.
riffing on the same idea. So it's and obviously everybody knows Twain, but Wolfe loved classic authors. He loved Dickens. He loved Twain. You can tell. You can feel it.
You can really feel it. There's also, just like we kind of were already mentioning, and like we've talked about with Wolfe constantly, is the referential nature, referring back to works that came before. From taking pages directly out of Mort d'Arthur in this, and the classic characters and names and situations, and it's if you have any familiarity with your Arthur stories, it hits a lot of the major points just with this brand new and modern to the time of the book being written character thrust into it.
One of the as we get ready to kind of dig into this more, one of the things I think that's really interesting about this book though is it has takes. There are so many.
Yeah, it's a very American take.
It is it's an American take, but he's got
a agricultural sort of industrial.
So much stuff. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
It's that reminds me a lot of and it's not quite as over the top, but it's like Sam Eagle from the Muppets putting an American character into these dastard English. Sillies with their kings and it's
hierarchies and all
that. You said something, Daniel. So felt very very patriotic.
Reading
some of the sections of this book.
Yeah.
One little before I forget about it. This is almost certainly a huge reach, and just a coincidence. So our main character in the book, we have a chapter at the beginning and at the end that is Mark Twain writing as himself, having met this crazy old man who gave him this diary, and then he's relaying the diary. And so the majority of the book is this diary of this man named Hank Morgan, who is this American from the 1800s, the late 1800s, that finds himself somehow...
An engineer.
An engineer, and specifically working with Colt firearms.
Yeah.
That finds himself back in Arthurian times. So Hank Morgan, Red Dead Redemption 2's lead character, who
oh my god,
does
share
a sense of humor in a very kind of Twain-esque satirical way. There's a lot of Twain satire in the Red Dead Redemption universe.
Totally.
The main character in that is Arthur Morgan. So again, this is probably a massive reach and a big coincidence, but it feels like maybe not, because last name Morgan, but then just taking Arthur putting it in there. Yeah. So I don't know if Rockstar was, winking and nodding at that, because there's not really any other similarities.
Sure.
But,
right. I have a reach too. Black Knight with Martin Lawrence. It feels kind of the same.
I mean, I think it clearly is
certainly
riffing on it, but
he
just
goes back in time. He's like, I'm
but
a
just
knight.
No,
but just
almost, yes,
yeah,
for sure. That's not. I feel
It's
like
a
my
different
reach
guy.
is a lot
Yeah.
more of a reach, but
A Knight's Tale.
but that just occurred to
Maybe?
me, and I wanted to shout it out there before I forgot about it.
yeah.
But this was I so enjoyed this book. It was such a joy to read. It was just I found it so refreshingly just fun.
It was fun,
mostly,
and funny, and
Until it wasn't.
well, yeah, for sure. The ending is really like it shifts in tone.
There's a
like
couple moments.
and there's a couple moments like it. I will say, well, there's two big thoughts, and I want to caveat this with saying I really enjoyed this book. It's hilarious. It's a blast. I'm just glad it exists because it's so well written and has so many interesting ideas. I found myself also like, I don't know if I could say I like this book fully, because like the disdain he has for the medieval people was like so intense. I was like, this is like, it really bothered me.
These are the
And I
stupidest
don't mean like
yeah.
I got all prissy about it. I was like, oh my God, he thinks these people are like
Morons.
He really hates these people.
Well,
like,
you know what's
it was really interesting to me. And again, that's where it was like, I did not like that aspect of the book, is really what I want to say, to the point where it colored the entire thing to a degree. It's not a bad book, is what I enjoyed my experience of reading it. And it was like, it's one of those things that was like, it was impactful. It was really well written, but I was like, why did he
he
do
shits on
it?
these people very much.
In his defense, he was about 300 years closer to the British tyranny than we were.
Oh, sure. Well, and I actually,
that's got to be like he's like, screw the Catholic Church.
I read more about it.
Less than that. Like he only wrote this like 110 years after the
Revolution. So
That's
there's
what I'm saying.
a lot
Like,
more
it's
to stand there
very
too.
close.
Well, and I also read Twain obviously had very strong feelings on the South, and we're really close after the Civil War. And I actually think that is the impulse, because supposedly and famously Twain hated Sir Walter Scott, who wrote Ivanhoe.
Interesting.
And believed that the whole Southern thing was them glomming on to Sir Walter Scott's thing.
Oh.
And that whole like gentleman's thing was like them doing English something. And there were connections to the English and the South.
For sure.
And so like
With
his
like the
screw
lordship mentality. And
yeah. And his like screw the English. And there's obviously a lot about slavery in this book.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot about all of that.
Yeah, very interesting, very progressive for the time politics.
But there's a lot of that in there, which is all really good and interesting and really well told. But his like hatred of the English, I say hatred, his disdain, and
he's pretty mean to them
he's
throughout,
pretty mean
so
to them.
it's kind of apparent.
He's like, they're morons, they're idiots. It's like, that's the whole thing. And it's like him doing that is, I think, one, just affected for humor and for the point of the book. And again, it maybe what he also just thinks was the case. And then also, I think it's something to do with this Walter Scott thing. Because the book is not liked in England. This book is like, they're like, this is awful. For this, they're like, what is this? They're like, for like reading it, it's like, it's so rude.
Yeah.
Like,
deal with it.
I know. So again, I do not dislike the book.
What if
but
Sir
it was
Arthur
like,
was not the most honorable, but the dumbest?
I was shocked how mean the book was. I did not. I just didn't expect.
See, that's what I loved about it though, because it reminds me. It reminds me of
fair.
Vonnegut, and I feel like Vonnegut has to happen.
Absolutely.
Because
Well, that's why I wanted
Twain,
to talk to you guys about it, because it's like it's not even that we're going to disagree, but it was like because I enjoyed reading it, and I'm glad I read it. It's not at all that.
Well, here's something else that I kind of wanted to point out that I think maybe is related to this potentially.
Sure.
I love history. I don't know enough about history to know much about the. This is going to sound like a weird way to say it, but the history of history, meaning I am curious to know what, even though it was technically closer, I'm curious to know like what amount was actually known by Twain and people in that time period of like, just because like the majority of the book is set in the like 600s, which is like right after Rome
falls,
vacated, right
Or
before.
in
I
that
think
area,
I want to say that the Viking invasion was in 7 something.
Yeah, it was like kind of
the
a,
Norman
well,
invasion
it
was
already-
1066,
and the Saxons were, I think, through that whole.
the Saxons
entire
were
time,
invading.
They're coming and they're doing things.
So it's like it is technically actually I believe where the historical version of Arthur would come in.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Twain is writing it as a very medieval world with obviously chainmail existed at this time, but like full plate mail and all of these, tactics and just the world itself is what we would picture like.
Yes.
He's 13th century.
He's
England.
setting it because that's when Mort's written, or 13th, 14th century, somewhere in there. But then Mort is even pretty clear that it's like, no, this happened in this happened in 500.
Right. So it makes, and obviously like,
but it's like they're doing anachronisms.
Yeah, but in that time, there was no
but
written history or
who
anything.
even knows anachronisms at that time? It's
Well,
like
yeah,
kind
sure.
of know.
So so I wonder if maybe there was part of how he wrote the peasantry and everything that was colored by not having a clear picture of history. Sure. I don't think so. I think that it's probably a satirist who doesn't have the highest opinion of the English, especially because, like you said, we're very close to the Revolution. We're in the same century as the War of 1812.
Absolutely,
the Civil War had just wrapped up, and England spent a lot of time waffling back and forth about how much aid they were going to give the South.
Sure.
So I suspect that it because it also the other thing that it feels very similar to is Holy Grail, Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah. Oh, sure, for sure,
absolutely.
And I have to imagine that I would be interested to hear if any of them have talked about it. I kind of imagine that
they would be English people that like it.
I was going to say that's kind of makes me think that they probably enjoyed it.
Well, but I will say that the difference there I do think is Monty Python's is pretty broad brush making fun of everybody.
Well, they're satirists too.
Yes,
they're
but like America is not being satirized in this book.
Correct.
And Morgan isn't being.
Right.
His opinions are displayed to us as the right and true and good.
Which is almost kind of funny because some of his dialogue is like, I did this and that, and it was perfect.
This
I'm like, okay.
This idea is pervasive in the book, the sort of disdain for these people. It is worst in the moment with the pigs and the lady. When they go to there's a prince and there's ogres and they show up and it's literally just pigs. And she's like, no, these are the princes. And he's like, all right, I'll just buy the pigs. And it's like, oh my God, like no one is that dumb. That was the one I was like, oh, and again, it's funny, but I was just like, yikes.
That's why I present the history thing because maybe it makes sense because the history is wonky.
Oh, sure.
But I suspect that it is the genius, peak satirist who also has personally a certain amount of disdain for.
Yeah. And I wanted to and just to put a bow on this moment of our discussion, I enjoyed the book. It's really funny. It's clearly he's making jokes, but it is, for me, it was like, this is a period of history I was like, I quite admire. I was like, whoa, bro. Like, yikes.
He's got different feelings.
So
well,
intense.
and here's another thing. Like, I think that at that time, that whole chivalric romance literature was very popular. I mean, romance literature was obviously still very popular in the United States at the time.
Yes. Lady Charlotte Guest's translation happens around this time of Mabinogion.
And Twain was kind of part of leading the charge of some of those authors that were getting.
Tennyson,
I think didn't we read them?
Around here.
Didn't we read them? Didn't we read Huck Finn as an example of realism? as one of the literary responses to Romanticism.
I think that's right.
I think that was right. But anyways, I wonder too if some of that was even less a critique of the English specifically, and more also him satirizing just that whole genre of, this extremely romanticized version of history.
Well, and then I did have one other last thing, and this isn't a critique. This is something I wanted to ask you guys about before maybe we dive into some moments from the book. It was interesting to me that, first off, this book starts with time travel, which is not explained at all, which is fine. But time travel happens, whether that's magic or science that we're not aware of. Okay, whatever. Then obviously he goes about being technical, but a big part of the book is him pretending to be a magician and using modern engineering and techniques to outwit these people that believe in magic. And then a lot of the book is his like rivalry with Merlin, who is listed as just a complete charlatan, and then some other magicians doing a similar thing. Until we get to the end of the book, where then Merlin somehow puts him to sleep for 1,300 years. I was curious, in a book that starts with basically literal magic, I thought it was funny then the disdain for magic and the way like you're such a goofus for believing in it is like so much of the book, for then the book to end with magic. And I was just curious, like, I don't know how I feel about it. I don't have a problem with it, but I was like, that's a really interesting choice.
I'm kind of coming up on this on the spot.
Yeah.
I wonder if that, and kind of what Sam was talking about a minute ago, is the satirizing of Americans.
I honestly completely agree with that. I think that he would have to be like, here's all the opinions, and honestly, I'm full of shit too.
But because like I'm right all the time. Everything that I'm doing is great, and my opinions are correct. And then also with the magic angle, it's just like, nah, magic's not real.
Hank,
even though this stuff already happens, it's not real.
Hank says too many absolute things that can't let me think that. Like whenever he talks, he's like, I had this idea and it was perfect. I'm like,
yeah. I will say I do think there's decent evidence, especially the way the book ends, for this to basically be a dream he had.
Oh, well, for sure, absolutely, and especially because like as we'll see as we go forward, one thing that I had questions about as going through it was like, man, he's making all of these amazing technological advances, and by the time the climax of the book arrives, he's essentially turned medieval England into 19th century America technologically. And then so I was like, so is there going to be
Camelot, right? That's it.
Yeah. Right. But so I was like, but we have the chapter at the beginning that seems to be like normal timeline. So like what happens that this isn't like how is the Mark Twain chapter at the beginning not, flying cars and Jetsons future or something?
Well, yeah.
And they resolve it, but it also lends itself to a dream, him being crazy, something.
But they do give an answer that all of this was destroyed, and
they do, he blows everything up so that the church can't get it, which I love.
And he kind of like, I actually learned what the interdict was because of reading this. I was like, interdict, what is that? And I was like, oh shit, that would make sense. They would think everything in this town is evil and like all excommunicated, really. So they would abandon all of it as heresy. Yep. Which, if there were technological advances back then that were just called heretical, they wouldn't even.
Well, and
they wouldn't even look at it.
And it's a really easy, because he spends the entire book antagonizing and trying to bring down the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I do love that at the beginning. He's like, and then I'd have the church on my back, and they'd never get off.
Yeah. So real quick before we move on, we all listened to the audiobook for this, and I don't know how long this will be available in this way, but if you're interested and you have an Audible subscription, there is for free in your Audible a unabridged version of this book read by Nick Offerman, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, it's very good.
I cannot think of anybody better to read Mark Twain than Nick Offerman, and he nails it.
I feel like he is the face of Mark Twain now.
Yeah.
Like if Mark Twain was speaking, it takes the shape of Nick Offerman at this point in time.
He would.
For me.
I feel confident that Mark Twain would listen to that reading and be totally satisfied.
Yeah.
That makes me think they should, like with Andy Serkis doing all of the Lord of the Rings material, should have him do at least all the major Mark Twains.
God, yes.
That's a great idea.
It'd be spectacular.
Yeah, because honestly, Offerman reading Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer would be great.
It'd be so good.
So dope.
So good. Please, Nick, if you're listening, we love you. B, please do more Mark Twain.
C, would you like to be on the podcast?
Yeah. We'd love to have you.
We could talk about the reading of the book.
Yes.
Yes.
We want to know about audio.
And many other things.
Many other things.
How long does it actually take?
What's your order at Taco Bell? I want to know.
So, like we said, one interesting way that this book differs from Le Morte d'Arthur as far as the world that Hank Morgan finds himself in, one thing that we discussed about with Mort is that Merlin is not really in Morte d'Arthur after the very beginning. Like, he doesn't show up and he doesn't really do much wizardly stuff after that transformation of Uther Pendragon into the whatever his name was, the Baron that he killed to sleep with his wife.
One of the
Merlin,
more nobler acts.
Yeah, but Merlin does obviously, as mentioned, play a much more important kind of antagonist role.
He's present through all of this. Yes,
Yankee.
It's so fun.
And I love
it's so fun with him and just being like, Merlin's just totally full of shit. He's like pretending and he's got a couple tricks. He's like, no one can be around when I do this one. And
although here's another thing another bit of magic that we see, and this is more towards the end of the book, but the big joust, the tournament where Hank just murks a bunch of knights.
Yeah.
Sir Sagramore has a cloak or
of invisibility.
He has an invisibility cloak.
Just pretend though.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's just them pretending.
It's just them.
He just puts it on, and then he gives him the cloak, and then Hank just pretends he can't see him. That's the whole
I missed that bit. That's so good.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
And then everybody else is like, "Oh!" But that's the whole point, is that they're so gullible and stupid that they all just.
It's an Emperor's New Clothes
They now
situation.
just also think he's invisible.
But he also
Emperor's
keeps saying
New
he's like who is the one guy? It's like, well, we have to kill this guy because somebody came in town and said he did something bad. He's like, did the guy even say his name? It's like, well, no, he came in with like a mask on. He's like, this guy stole my stag or something. He's like, and you're just gonna torture him because of that? It's like, well, yeah, if he's innocent, then he'll never confess.
Yeah,
and it was like
that was Morgan Le Fay that was taught.
I know, it's so funny though. It's like, but your witness could easily have lied about that. It's like, well, I mean, if he confesses, then he's like, he's not innocent if he confesses. Like, what the hell?
That's hilarious. I'm gonna have to read that.
Oh, there were so many
again,
bits like that were just like,
there's a lot. Like, again, not to get out of order, but like, he convinces. They do a Prince and the Pauper thing, which is funny because he also wrote Prince and the Pauper with Arthur. Yeah. They teach him how to be common and do a whole thing, which is a really great moment in the book. And actually, his description
when Hank is trying to get him to like stoop like a peasant,
yes.
and he's like the list of woes that he describes to like, you've lost your job and you have no money and your children are starving and your wife is sick, and listening to it is like, oh my.
Yeah, but I will say that was the one time he pays like any sort of honor to royalty, is talking about Arthur's dignity. Yeah, that's like the one moment. But then that whole plot line goes on. They meet some peasants. They do a whole thing. They eventually get caught and sold into slavery.
Yep.
And one of the funniest moments in the book too, and that goes on, and they talk about how bad slavery is, and Arthur's going to now outlaw slavery. They do a whole thing with that, which is great. But then he's like, to my ever-living shame, I went for $7.
I know.
He's like, I was so mad. He was like, I was easily worth like 60 gold.
Well, and Arthur's pissed about it too.
Yeah, they're like,
But I think it was like Arthur kept insisting he should have gone for at least $25, and I was like, well,
that's too much.
Pump the brakes there, bro.
It's so funny. I was like, oh my god,
dude. Oh man, when we talk
too
about
funny.
this is totally not in line chronologically at all. But one of my absolute favorite discussions is when he like goes to the blacksmith's town, and he's like trying to compare their societies, and he's like, oh, we have higher wages. We have higher wages in our city, and he's like, you may have higher wages, but how much does it cost for you to get a chicken and yours? And he's like, well, it costs like, 4. And he's like, well, in ours it costs 2. So literally we could work 40 days and buy 10 times more chicken than you could. And he's like, but our wages are higher. And he's like, and then he said, I go back and forth with him so many times, and he still doesn't get it. And he's like, so I just had to punch him. He's like, he wouldn't get it, so I just had to hit him because I had to get the point across that I was better than him. I love that so much. And to me, that's most of the political discussion in the world right now. It's like, if you know you're right and you have all these things like, our wages are higher, so we're better. Like, it's like, so that was the kind of the best moment of the whole book to me.
So for future listeners, we are recording this on November 8th, 2024.
And hopefully we'll all have freedoms next year to listen to this.
So I found a lot of things about this book to be like your advertisement, strangely prescient to the last few weeks. Indeed. But speaking of this section, when they're traveling around in disguise and sold into slavery and everything, that was when some of the biggest downers, and where I felt like, because he is obviously, presenting all this hilarious satire about life in medieval times and about life under a monarchy and, all these things we've been talking about. In some of these sections, he kind of gets real about it for a second. Mm-hmm. And like, I almost started crying with the section of the young woman that is hanged for no reason. Yeah. And her child is taken away right before she's hanged, and all that whole section, like, it was heartbreaking. Yeah. And like not an ounce of comedy in that, just like very real feeling. Same thing with the section where Morgan Le Fay is talking about, like, well, I have to torture him or my soul is blah, 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 blah. Like, that was funny. But then when he goes in and is talking to this guy and his wife, like, then it's like, oh, shit. Yeah. Downer.
Yeah, he's not confessing so the state doesn't destroy his family.
Right.
At this point,
Yeah. So it's he had a very deft hand at, like, offering some kind of maybe real glimpses into issues that he was trying to satirize as well.
For sure. Well, in the whole climax of the book, I know we're jumping around. The knights all show up to his, industrialized town.
Oh, the war?
And they have a whole war and
okay, so you want to talk about fucking seeing the future?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. It's in 1889. I did wonder how much of it, because obviously, they set up the Knights Charge. They have electric wires set up.
This was kind of my favorite part of the book, even though it was maybe it was.
And then they also
I thought
have
it was
Gatling
kind of funny.
It's very World War I. It's also
extremely.
There was a
World War
Prussian
I.
war in there where I think some of this stuff had already started.
Well, it's kind of, you can track the evolution of modern warfare from starting at the Civil War, which is probably where most of this came from, as far as just waves of men charging
bodies
something and
of
just
men
getting wrecked. Especially when you had the Confederates still fighting with essentially advanced muskets, and then the Union getting access to the brand new repeating rifles where you could have 7 to 14 shots loaded up in a single rifle. But it struck me as extreme. There's the Russia versus Japanese war, and there was a Prussian war, I think.
But it might have been a few years later.
But it really felt to me very World War I, because you essentially had just one group locked in with superior technology versus literal, cavalry charges and
Yeah.
knights in armor, and 50 guys taking out, what was it, like 50,000? He said
30,000.
30,000.
Tens of thousands.
54 took out all 30,000.
Tens of thousands
Yeah.
of men. So extremely World War I.
Mostly with electric wires, but yeah, it's
Because they're wearing just giant
it's really,
armor.
It's really brutal the way.
When he plays on their dumbness too, so
Yeah,
they're
of
just going to
course.
touch it, and the current's so strong that they can't even
just-
scream out. They just
they just
die.
die.
instantly.
Fry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pretty brutal.
Yeah.
It's very brutal, and ingenious.
Yeah.
But yeah, it struck me very much as like, oh, here's Twain seeing the future. A little
Sure.
Because you have all these stories
clearly
about
see where
like
it's going.
German
This was
machine
pre
gun nests.
World War One.
Oh yeah, but they, at the beginning of World War I, they were literally still using. I mean, they used them throughout the war to an extent, but at the beginning of the war, the French especially had full-on horse cavalry,
Yeah.
and were doing these, epic medieval style charges on German machine gun nests and just getting annihilated.
Yeah.
Because it was, there's such a technological leap
That's a big
without
one, yeah.
without a corresponding leap in tactics.
Yep.
So yeah, talk about Twain. I mean, Twain was a genius, but that was that little chapter there at the end. I was like, wow, he's seeing the direction that things are going.
Well, and it's like
Yeah.
you said, there are moments where the humor leaves and the absurdity of the story leaves, and it gets intense and real. But this is the end of the book is such a huge tonal shift.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
Well, 'cause
his
all that-
kid's
all
sick,
that-
he leaves,
yeah.
he comes back, and then he's got to defend his area.
Well,
But-
and what he talks about, like at the end, he's like, we may have like decimated the army, but now we've completely trapped ourselves here.
yeah.
We cannot leave this city anymore, and
Yeah.
like we're
Cannot
gonna,
leave, and
we're
they're
gonna
surrounded
die, yeah.
by rotting corpses, and
Yeah.
they're
It's
all
poisoning
starting to
the
get
air, yeah.
sick.
Yeah.
So
Very
They-
grimdark.
yeah,
Oh yeah, it really is.
yeah, it's not noble dark
interesting.
at all.
No, not noble dark.
But in the same book, knights ride on bicycles.
But they
They rest. I mean,
come
that's
to
how he
save the
gets
day
out
on
of slavery.
bicycles.
He gets out of slavery because Lancelot brings the cavalry, but they're riding bicycles.
Yeah.
And he, I do love you talking about it's Sir Sagramore, where he's like, we're gonna have a duel, but like he's gonna go search for the Holy Grail for a few years first.
Right. Yeah.
Which also
Yeah. So we'll
cracked me
do the
up.
duel afterwards.
So he's like, all right, I've got time to prepare.
Dude,
Then
him-
that, and then also the beginning where he fakes, he knows there's an eclipse coming.
Oh,
So
that
that's how
bit is
the
so
whole book
funny.
really gets going with that, is where he fakes that he's controlling, taking
Yeah, he's
the
gonna
sun
destroy
away.
the
I
sun.
feel like that is the entire plot of Back to the Future 2. Like him getting the book and
Right.
knowing
That's
the
actually
dates.
interesting. Back to the Future is absolutely, I think.
Well, I mean, he knows how to
I've seen
predict
some
the
of this
date,
stuff.
like you
Yeah.
know, Biff or whatever gets rich because he can predict
Yeah.
like who's gonna win and gambles. Like so.
Where he's got chrono consensus.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
He-
Some guys have signed up to this a long time ago. I don't know if they got the discount we get, so you better cash in, especially before them tariffs kick in, right?
Yep.
But yeah, the eclipse thing is so funny and so, almost the most, I guess, visually like encapsulating thing. Just him being like, "Oh, sun,
Yeah.
I was
come
kind of
consume the world."
I was kind of happy to have a funny eclipse.
Oh,
'Cause,
for sure. Yeah,
between
yeah, yeah.
Full
all of
Metal
our
and,
other
and
eclipse, yeah.
Berserk, anytime I think about eclipses now, it's like, oh boy, what's about to happen?
It's like apocalypse
yeah.
almost.
So
yeah.
this was a nice change of pace with that.
So obviously, again, this is a satirist book, but it was funny too when he's talking about the sun, where they're like, "Take it away," and they're like, he's like making a deal with everything
Yeah.
about this. But what's funny is like eclipses actually take quite a while.
Yeah.
So
he's
he's
like, I'm
kind of
gonna
like
think about it.
It's
like, I've
he's
gotta,
gotta,
like,
bargain
meander,
and like,
yeah.
give me clothes. It's. I thought
just
that was really
make
funny.
up stuff to make the
The
time.
other side of it though was I was like, and again, this book is the bit of this book is the people in this medieval time are morons. But I was like, people clearly surely knew what an eclipse was, right? I think so, right?
I mean, these
depends on
guys
where
would
you
have
were.
all
No,
been
probably
pretty
not.
Maybe
young
not.
and died, you know?
I just feel like they would happen often enough to where people are like, hey, sometimes the moon goes in front of the sun, like, you know. And when the moon's not in the sky, you could like.
I don't
I
think
think it's
I
easy-
don't think
maybe
they
not,
I don't think they knew what they were back then, because they were
Really?
back then they still would have been thinking the
Interesting.
Earth is flat, and
That's true.
It's a big sign of something.
So.
They were pretty dumb.
They
back
did.
then.
Well, I mean, maybe in that part of the world that would be true. I know they actually they knew when they were coming. Like in Greece, they knew.
Sure.
Like,
well,
but that's like.
But that's kind of the whole Dark Ages thing.
No, I know. But that's almost 1,000 years ago, which is also
goes to lend towards his industrial stuff.
No,
because I'm sure that at the time, literally, like in the Middle East, I'm sure there were. They had a better handle on what that sort of thing was.
Paging historians would 500 medieval people, royalty at least.
Well,
they know what eclipses was. Let's ask a historian.
Let's be a little more forgiving, because certainly they wouldn't have at that point. But like if in an actual medieval time period, not the date that he wrote it, but like the time period that it actually was. I think the
Romans would have known what an eclipse was.
Yeah, but the Britons wouldn't have when they
left.
But
the Britons were there a long time.
Yeah, but
they also got destroyed.
They didn't do
so
any of the
many
science
times.
stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I doubt it.
I don't know.
But yeah, if there's a historian listening, please inform us.
That's the other one I'd love to ask a historian. And I don't mean this in any sort of gotcha way. I do wonder.
I mean, I got you with time travel because
it's not real. Is it real? Someone tell us. No, but I did wonder if you actually sent an American engineer from the 1880s, which is actually probably the perfect time to send someone back.
True. Yes.
Just practical enough.
Yes. Where they would know everything is machine based. Everything is like you have to actually know how to make the cylinders and all the parts.
Yeah, they would get the simple concept of an engine.
He's making.
Right?
He's working at a gun factory too, specifically.
Yes.
So things like gunpowder, explosives, and then also machining and milling and all these technologies.
So the one thing I wonder about though is like international trade was actually still a really big deal in the 1800s, and then obviously before that, going back to like 14 something.
Yep.
So like to say it doesn't exist is exaggerating, but that doesn't exist in the same way.
Not in this part of the world.
So I'm just curious, like, because he obviously does the full Industrial Revolution. It's a book with time travel in it, so that's fine. I am curious though how much of this would literally be possible with someone with that knowledge to go back. Like, how much of it could you actually do?
Well, it's also not just his knowledge. Because he did the eclipse magic thing,
he also buy-in with all the people.
Well, he got top level buy-in. Like he has unlimited resource and manpower.
That's
but I get what you're saying.
The whole nation,
like the literal raw materials needed. I think there's quite a bit of iron.
That's I mean there are a lot of resources in England.
Yeah,
or were.
At that point in time, especially, I think there's a lot of coal and.
I'm thinking a lot of this is possible. What I don't know is like gunpowder and some of the other and then the metal working, because he ends up getting telegraph wires and things. That's the one I'm most skeptical about. But also the book it's like 30 years or something. It's
it covers a long.
So it takes him a while to get a lot of this.
Well,
stuff
he also
done.
has to slow roll it because of the church.
Well, that too,
right?
Yeah. But it's also you also have to baby steps. Where if you want metalworks, well, you have to start mining, and then and then once you got mining, then you have to start doing it, and then it's like everything then compounds on itself. Again, I don't mean to take the book that seriously, but it just made me.
That's what we do, dude.
No,
That's
I know.
What we do.
But it made me think. I was just like, how much of this would it take? Well, it's like yes, it is possible, but it would take actually 100 years, not 30. That's just what I'm curious. I'm just curious that side of it. And again, maybe it wouldn't be possible in his lifetime, but he could have started things potentially.
Yeah,
I just wonder. Someone more knowledgeable than me could probably actually be like, actually back then, you could have done something. But also, the revolution that happened, obviously it happened for a reason. But again, it's one of those things going back, you can't make cell phone towers that quickly.
Yeah.
But the Industrial Revolution stuff, all the stuff
that happened in 20 years.
It's all there to do it. Yeah, it's
Industrial Revolution was 20 years.
Yeah, and it's steam and coal based.
It's manpower at that point, which he had unlimited manpower.
Well, and he implements a late 1800s version of electricity, which is not.
Yes, it's not that crazy.
It's not that crazy.
No.
Compared to if it was a 2024 Connecticut Yankee,
Yes.
We'd be screwed. He'd go back and be like, "You guys got Reddit?"
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like, everything technologically is a lot more.
I don't know.
It's a lot more specialized now.
That's why the 1880s makes sense because it's
it's
very practical. You kind of get how everything works.
I don't know that there are many cobalt mines in the UK. Maybe there are, but I don't know if know if there are. So
Silicon.
and it's pre-oil. Obviously, there's a lot of oil. Like that's a huge industry in Scotland, off the coast.
Yeah.
But
that was also like that. I don't think you could do. I don't know when did they start drilling in the water?
certainly not the Middle Ages.
No, I don't think not the Middle Ages.
I wonder what's underneath all that magic water. My another favorite bit about this is his critique on the knights in armor. Just wearing armor in general is so funny.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
He's like, I couldn't even get on my horse without help. Like, I'm just stifling hot. I just wanted somebody to pour water all over me, and I'm like, that is how we feel to be in a suit of armor.
I've always thought about that. I was like, wearing armor just sounds awful. It just
I don't think it's as awful as you would think.
Really?
I've not worn a full suit of armor. I have worn a chainmail shirt.
I've worn a chainmail too.
And it is heavy.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of heavy that you would get used to.
Yeah.
And my understanding,
the heavy vest they wear in Hunter x Hunter to train.
There you go. Or like Goku in 100 times gravity. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that a full suit of armor is not as heavy as you would expect.
Okay.
So it's not something that like you couldn't train in and get used to, but they're also made to be very maneuverable.
Sure. It's the heat.
So you can fight
the stuffy. But I guess
well,
that
here's
being
the
said,
thing
we
too,
are
like,
in you are in England.
I was gonna say our conception of heat.
Yeah,
is
we're in the
different.
South. Yeah.
So like, the idea of like being
wearing
a night
here,
in the summer here is like
you like literally couldn't do it.
I would
impossible.
rather die. That's why all the natives here were almost just naked all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you would cook.
Yeah.
You would be like the knights grabbing onto the electric
So
fence.
that's
cooking
my,
inside
that's
your
my
armor.
bad. I mean, obviously it doesn't get quite as bad, but Italy and Spain are gonna have some similar issues at times, maybe. But also, I do think there's a lot less plate armor in those places.
In
later
some
on, there's
time
some.
periods, yeah.
Yeah,
But I think that also then, I don't know. It's a
it's
gap in my
interesting.
knowledge, but it is an interesting question.
Ask a historian. We need another.
Yeah, I'm sure nobody's reviewed Mark Twain's
Where's the
writings
hottest
before.
culture that had plate armor? That's what we want to know.
Yeah, certainly wasn't here.
Well, I mean, there was armor like the Saracens and in the Crusades and everything. They had, I think they wore chainmail, but they I don't think they had much in the way of medieval type armor. But then the Europeans were going down there, and the Crusaders wearing full armor, and so I guess
they did. They did.
I guess you
that.
can just get used to.
Yeah.
You can just get used to stuff.
I am curious how much they. That is, I mean, honestly, in general, and I do know that actually there's when you're fully clothed, because people didn't used to didn't used to show skin the way people do nowadays, like wear shorts or anything like that. I do think there's a certain amount of one you just get used to it.
Yep.
And also mosquitoes are a problem, so actually being clothed actually. Ends up
Well,
being
and sometimes
important
more
than
clothes
mosquitoes.
helps keep you
It does.
protected from the sun as well.
Yes,
Here's
that's
a
a thing too.
Here's another bit of useless Star Wars trivia that is apropos. Supposedly, when they were shooting A New Hope, and they were shooting the scenes in Namibia, I think, of the sand troopers looking for R2 and C-3PO at the beginning of the movie on Tatooine. Apparently, the story goes that they had to hire U.S. Marines to play the sand troopers because they were the only ones that were tough enough to wear the stormtrooper armor out in the desert.
Wow.
And all the actors and extras that
I'd
they
never
hired
heard that
were
before.
passing out, and it was too much for them. So,
Amazing.
That kind of sucks.
I don't know if that's true. I think it's true. I think I've seen that in enough reputable places that
sounds-
it probably is true. But
it
it's a fun
rings
story.
true. Yeah,
It looks hot in those things. So.
it does. Well, yeah.
What a
Well,
great book.
Other standout moments.
yeah.
The
Talked
well.
about a bunch. The Well's a great.
The
was
Well's
a great
really
moment.
I mean, that's the
Yeah.
first time where he's like, Merlin's just gonna do this. Like, and
Yeah.
somebody else did this before and
Yep.
pretended.
There's
it
a
was
well
magic.
that's closed up.
And a fissure,
It's
yeah.
open and closed a few times. Merlin's saying he's gonna do it, but he's claiming there's a demon in it, and that
Right.
that he can't unseal it.
Well,
and then,
even Hank is like, I'm gonna unseal this in a very easy way, man. I have to drum it up so they know my power is total.
Yeah.
And I have to blame it on something. And then he does like a blast in it, but and it like works almost immediately. But then he's like, no, I have to show this in a showy way. So he like makes a pipe and channels it to where it'll gush water out of the side of the church. And then he builds all these explosions to have different colors in the sky. And he's like, now look, the well, and like explodes everywhere. Water's gushing out, and he's like, we have called the demons by name and sent them away. And it's like, and this is how you convince everyone that you're legit.
Well,
it's so funny.
He talks about it. Hank Morgan talks about like how it is almost. He starts to recognize it as kind of a fault, a character flaw in him, that like everything has to be showy.
Yeah.
And how it gets him in trouble.
Yeah.
He starts to recognize that as he's maturing throughout the story, that like sometimes my penchant for the theatrical overcomplicates and gets me in trouble with some things.
Yeah, I like
such a great
I like when he has the battle with the magician guy who's like, I can tell what anyone's doing who's not here.
Yeah.
Whose bit is just to say stuff that's just not
Not
to say
true,
whatever. And people are just like, okay, we take it. We take it at face value.
And he kept saying that. He's like, most people just believe anything they're told about it.
And then Hank gets him because he's got telegraph wires, so he knows Arthur's coming. They ask about Arthur, and then it's a whole.
Well,
the little bit he says about one dig, he's like, a dig I always did at Merlin is I had him always like, why don't you go project what the weather's going to be? Because he's like, every time Merlin called, the weather was always the opposite of whatever he said would happen. And I thought that was funny just in modern times of how often the weatherman gets it wrong.
Well, and there was another great moment too when Hank and Arthur are hanging out, and Arthur is talking about how Merlin can prophesy, and it's like, you should prophesy more. Why don't you prophesy? And
he's like,
Hank has to be
I can prophesy.
I mean, I can, but like I don't. But like if you want me to, I can actually. There's two kinds of prophecies. There's like the kind of immediate one, which is like not a big deal, like anybody can do it. But there's long-term prophecy, which that's the only thing that I concern myself with, and I can do that for 1,300 years.
Yeah,
and Arthur's
it's
just
pretty
like,
funny.
What?
Yeah, and he keeps on saying like, there's magicians to a certain degree, like Merlin's, and then there's mine. Which goes far and above anything Merlin could ever achieve. I loved all that.
So
His
petty.
digs at Merlin were so funny.
I loved the. We haven't talked about Sandy yet.
Oh yeah,
but I love the introduction to Sandy where he does the very Mort Arthur thing of here's this maiden that's just gonna go with you.
Yeah.
And Hank's like, what?
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, this is how it works. The maiden goes with the knight, and he just goes with you.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? And
she helps you on and off your horse.
and that relationship, that I want to say, if we didn't mention it in the podcast, we'd certainly have talked about it. That moment of, the ladies just up and riding off with these strange knights, as just that's what you do in the Mort Arthur world. I enjoyed that. That Twain also kind of had the same thought about it and put it into the book. Similarly, I thoroughly enjoyed, because we've talked about how you would not think that there's such a thing as too much jousting, but Mort Arthur proves that there can be such a thing as too much jousting.
Ceaseless jousting.
And Hank has the same feeling. It's like, oh my God, they just won't stop jousting.
All they do is joust.
And these poor horses.
Yeah. Oh man,
so good.
I love it.
The Knights on Bikes thing too. It's just so funny. It's so silly.
Well, that's the cover of the book here.
Yeah.
The Knights on Bikes. It's absolutely phenomenal.
I mean, one thing though, throughout everything we've read of Arthur is Lancelot's always a badass.
Yeah, he does.
Even in this one, he's like, he was kind of the best.
Well, and Hank talks about how much he likes him.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like everybody's just like, man, that guy. My guy. Lancelot.
What a guy.
He's like Chris Hemsworth for everyone. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It was just a stud.
Just a stud. Nobody knocks him. Why not?
And I did like when the inevitable happens with the, finally bringing up the Lancelot and Guinevere romance.
Oh yeah, and Arthur just is gone now. Like he's like, oh yeah, and he died.
Well, but like also like Twain writing about how literally only one person in the entire kingdom.
There were
didn't know
only
what was
one
going
pair
on.
of eyes that weren't turned towards this. Yeah.
And it was Arthur's.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Because that's we've talked about it ad nauseum a million times, at least amongst the three of us. But it's that's always been a point of contention with me and that kind of classic Arthur story of that love triangle, the affair that happens, and Arthur just being like completely blind to
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
I feel like in Mort, though,
it's
they were
almost
like, he
Arthur's
kind of
good.
knew.
Yeah.
But just didn't know that everybody knew.
It's like he knew, but he didn't want to. It's not that he didn't care, but I feel like we mentioned this a little bit in the Mort episode. I always interpreted, because they talk about it as like Arthur and Lancelot are best friends, and then Arthur and Guinevere are in love, and it's great. And then but there's some stories there's an affair. It's like, thinking about this in the Mort context, it's actually Arthur is a regal, royal, noble king. Guinevere is his like young bride, and there's actually probably a pretty significant age gap there. Lancelot and Guinevere are maybe the same age. Lancelot and Arthur are not best buds, but Lancelot is Arthur's best knight, and he loves him, but it's more like an uncle, and there's like a chair. It's like, it's a very, the relationships are just not what I thought of them as a kid.
Yeah.
Because that's how people always say, it's like Lancelot was King Arthur's best friend.
Because of how much older Arthur was, yeah.
Yeah,
Depends on it, yeah.
It depends on the story and the interpretation. There are stories where they write them as best friends, and that's the whole thing.
I mean, to me, it seemed like Arthur kind of knew about it, but when it started to become a problem is when Mordred and Agravain.
Yeah.
They literally
well, and I'm not
made
justifying
it. They
the affair,
made it a
but
problem.
It's. I think about it differently now. Well, I even think about it in modern politics terms sometimes, where you've got like almost like pseudo-arranged political marriages of convenient marriages, and then people have romances outside of those because there's no love in their marriage. It's like a marriage of convenience.
Yep.
We think of Arthur as this idealized thing, but the actual story is it's actually something else sometimes. It's a little bit of both, at least.
Yeah. And I found it interesting, and it wasn't one of the funny points, but I mean, there was some humor to how Twain addressed it in this one.
For sure.
So, I love this book.
I very much enjoyed it.
I'm looking forward to reading it again in the future. Any closing thoughts on Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court?
I will say, and I know I brought up some like things I had problems with or issues with or whatever, but I wish more books were like this, in that it has such strong opinions on what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And not even just that it's funny, but it's like, it's really going for it. Obviously Twain's a master and a classic author, so like not everybody's going to be able to do that, but like it's going for it in such a way that I really admired and enjoyed, and it's like a classic for a reason. You can absolutely feel that, even though it is a strange book. There's no plot. It's very practical in a way that that's the part I didn't expect. It's very Robinson Crusoe, mm-hmm. which is actually, I think, name dropped in the book, because he's there, mm-hmm. and he's like got to figure everything out. But in a way that's actually really nice. I do actually like the practicality of the book, but it surprised me and then you get used to it as it goes along. But
yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
That would be my closing thought. The practicality I loved so much, of him building up his little like team of smart people, and then like him making silk shirts, and he's like, I had more money than I knew what to do with, like kind of stuff. I love that so much. Like just the way to like take a person at a time, put him back in this one, and suddenly he can just. I thought that was great, and just him naming himself the boss, like his title.
It's really funny.
Like he's like, I don't want to be a king, and he's like, I wouldn't stoop so low in my own humanity to be knighted or to be royalty.
Even
but
though
like,
he does, when it becomes the conversation about turning it into a republic, he does start thinking, and
I could be president. Yeah,
I don't want to be. I'd like to be president.
I'd like to be the first president of this. Yeah. And just all the stuff that he did, and like how perfect he like considered himself and stuff. I love the practicality of the book. I thought that was the most charming thing about all of it. and just the naming of himself as the boss.
I know I did a closing thought already. The other big takeaway.
But this is the last closing.
It's the last closing thought. I loved how patriotic the book was, and it was so refreshing.
From American patriotism.
American patriotism. Yeah. I loved how much it was. I love how it was just unabashedly, Americans are the best, and it was this was a pretty good time for America overall. It was refreshing. It was stuff I learned as a kid about American individualism and problem solving and the desire for liberty for the individual and for the individual to flourish and a sort of no nonsense approach that
our
really,
actual strengths.
Yeah.
Actual strengths.
And I think are true still of Americans today more than we let it on, and are good things about Americans still today. And it was so refreshing, almost annoyingly so. It was so refreshing to read a book that was just unabashedly leaning into that again, if someone did that nowadays, people would they would just not even take it seriously at all.
Yeah.
I absolutely adored that aspect of the book. I really did.
I loved we could have mentioned this earlier when we were talking about his seeming disdain for the peasantry. I very much enjoyed his blatant disdain for the Catholic Church.
Yeah. This dude did not like religion for sure.
The very
Whoever
much.
wrote this.
And even more so the
church
was the
state.
blending and the power of the church.
100%.
Which was why the revolution part of why we came to America, right?
You could that was another prescient seeming thing right now with all the blatant Christian nationalism that's going around in the country at the moment. But just the Catholics being the ruling power of the church at the time. You could do it with the evangelicals now in America if you were writing a similar thing, but just being I enjoyed that snarkiness very much, and that kind of tension between the two. And then the only other thing I have to say is just reiterating, I love a good satire, and it is you have to stress the good part because it is kind of hard to do. You have to have a point of view.
Yes. You have to go for it too. Yeah.
And you have to have the stones to do it. That's why there's not as much. There's some great plays. There was Monty Python, obviously. South Park is still knocking it out of the park. But it's fewer and farther between as far as comedy goes. A truly good satire, because it is difficult to pull it off, and nobody could really pull it off like Mark Twain. So
totally.
As much as I adore medieval Europe and knight stories, I also enjoy someone of Mark Twain's caliber taking the piss out of it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I mean, because the guy from the 1880s would really mess up their style.
Yeah.
Electric fences are not good if you're wearing a suit of armor. You're toast.
You're toast.
No, I don't care how chivalrous you are. You're fried.
You're fried.
You're fried. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Under Towers podcast. My name is Steven.
I'm Daniel.
Sam.
And if you enjoyed tonight's episode, please give us a like, give us a subscribe, leave us a comment. All those things are free for you and help us out with the algorithm. Give us a follow on Instagram, TikTok, all the social media bullshits. Listen to Horsebread, listen to Hole Dweller, and we will see you at the next episode.
Oh.
Marie.